Next, I'd like to introduce Mary Catherine Moffitt, who is with the Leukemia Lymphoma Society and has led several efforts in several states regarding oral parity efforts in legislation, and will tell us about the experience with that in Tennessee.
Mr. Shepherd. Okay? Yep. Good. I'm a walker. I absolutely want to thank TOPS and ACCC for inviting me today to talk about the issue of cancer treatment fairness. This schedule and the agenda today is really well laid out because I'd like to talk for the next few minutes specifically about the cost burden barrier to adherence for the patients that you're treating. Let's see, let me get my stuff together. Yeah, so I want to ask you a question. Benzene handling protocol, vaccine-driven disease prevention, child maternal health, tobacco control, seat belts. What do those things have in common? What's that? Yeah, for sure. These are public health policy changes that have changed the way people live their lives. And what's notable about these changes that I think in some ways we can take for granted is that they didn't happen quickly. They took years, decades even. Some are still going, certainly in prevention and tobacco control. But also, those initiatives required advocates, people, experts, people directly impacted by the potential policy change to be engaged and to follow the needle that measured the accomplishment that those policy changes eventually encompassed. So advocacy. My job at Leukemia Lymphoma Society is to direct advocacy, and what that means for me is that I work with patients to be able to share their experience with the cancer diagnosis and treatment with the right person in the right place at the right time. But patients aren't the only advocates that have been critical, particularly to this issue about cancer treatment fairness. Spouses, best friends, bereaved, parents, especially providers, have been critical to accomplishing the cancer treatment fairness movement in a number of places in the United States. So fair access is part of what this issue addresses. Patients that you're treating are experiencing unduly disproportionate out-of-pocket costs for cancer treatment that is self-administered or by pill, like we've spoken about, because it's covered in the pharmacy benefit of a commercial insurance plan, versus what's normally a co-payment or a different dollar amount for patients who receive treatment in a clinical setting by a provider because it's covered in the medical benefit of an insurance plan. So that's a significant difference in what we're going to talk about as a solution. And cancer cures, I think that everyone here agrees the cancer treatment landscape has just dramatically changed, particularly in recent years. And innovations in cancer care and treatment that you have access to has essentially remained on a shelf, proverbially and truly, to patients who can't access those innovative therapies and potentially curative therapies because of cost in particular. So that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. I'd like to give you a snapshot of the national landscape regarding solutions to the issue of access due to cost. And I'd like to give you especially a snapshot of what's happening here in Tennessee, where you work and serve patients. And then I'd like to hear from you how this issue, specifically the cost burden access challenge, has impacted your practice and impacted your patients that you treat. So I have no disclosures to provide. I'm not talking about any specific drugs. I do have a drug example that does not use a brand name. So these are my objectives. I'll make you a deal. I'll cover the first two, but I need your help covering the third. So I'm looking forward to hearing your experiences, and I'm absolutely open to those comments throughout if you have something that you really want to share. Here's an example of the issue of cost burden to patients who are on an orally administered treatment. This example is with ibrutinib for an MCL, mantle cell lymphoma patient. This patient has a commercial drug plan. So we're talking about patients with a commercial drug plan, not a Medicare plan, not Medicaid coverage. This patient's drug is a specialty drug. And typical of most commercial plans, generic drugs, preferred brand drugs and non-preferred brand drugs are part of tiers in the drug formulary that are often guided in cost by a flat copayment of $10, $20, $30, maybe $50, maybe $100 at the top. And then specialty drugs like ibrutinib are placed on additional tiers in the drug plan formulary that are subject to a coinsurance, which is a percentage of the drug cost. I think it's fair that everyone is on this page and is familiar with this differential. And that percentage or coinsurance of cost of drug to the patient is a difference of hundreds or even thousands of dollars out of pocket per month. For a patient with mantle cell lymphoma or chronic leukemia, CML, CLL, these patients are also looking at those out-of-pocket costs for life. And so the reason that LLS is particularly invested in being engaged in this issue you heard before is because the most prevalent use of orally applied oncolytics right now in cancer care is in the heme space, in the blood cancer space. So this is critically important to Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. It also means that this problem is not going away. In the last couple of years, the last few years, we've seen prescription drug plans have more drugs on plans subject to coinsurance cost calculation rather than a copayment. And we've also seen in those same years the number of coinsurance tiers increase in prescription drug plans. So that coupled with information shared earlier today that you're looking at a third of new cancer drugs in the pipeline anticipated to be applied orally, we have to figure out a solution that's not short-term. So since 2008, 41 state legislatures have passed legislation, a bill turned into law that addresses the issue of commercial plans and the out-of-pocket cost that patients pay for cancer treatment. The vehicle for this policy change has looked mostly the same across these states, including the bill that has been introduced here in Tennessee in the past and this year, and it identifies that insurers have the liberty to create parity in out-of-pocket costs to the patient for cancer treatment in whatever way works best for that plan. So insurers can determine what equity and cost to the patient looks like for all the cancer treatments, and we've seen this look different in lots of different states. Some have moved all cancer drugs to one component of the plan. Some have capped at $100 copay for any cancer treatment, and others have moved all cancer drugs to run through the pharmacy benefit. It's been different in different states. Most states have done as well, not all of them. 3 out of 7 patients have reported not adhering in some way to their treatment. I mentioned that this was really well timed. Besides the challenges, the clinical challenges that we've talked about this morning, I've also been talking over the years of this campaign about patients who aren't talking about cutting pills in half or skipping doses because of cost. Because of pride, patients don't want to say that I'm having trouble affording this cost. And this 3 out of 7 patients we're not talking about patients who are struggling to make ends meet before being diagnosed with cancer. We're talking about Patients like Andrea in Tennessee, who's a patient of Dr. Shepard's and was diagnosed with breast cancer and then prescribed an orally administered regimen that was going to save her life. She had been working 20 years in a health sciences career. She had a really stable life savings. She had recently married and gone from a single income household to a double income household. And when she looked at what her out-of-pocket cost responsibility would be based on her insurance coverage, she anticipated running through most of her savings pretty quickly. The same with Teresa, whose example is on the screen. Teresa is a CML patient who had to go through a couple of therapies to find what would work for her disease. And in doing so, bluntly shared that she and her husband suffered financial ruin. I mean, selling the house, moving into an apartment, coming close to filing bankruptcy. Both had really good jobs. She was in her 50s, early 50s. And because of her insurance coverage, her access to her treatment, the psychosocial burdens that come with the cost barrier, all of these things changed her life significantly. What's interesting to point out is that these patients were asked, would you be willing to say that in front of decision makers who could make a change to make this burden less impactful on patients? And they said yes. They also were identified through their providers. You know, knowing the kind of insurance the patient has, what their co-insurance is going to be, what their out-of-pocket cost responsibility is going to be, has been consistently knowledge in the hands of, you know, the clinic facilitators for managing oral oncolytics. Stacy, if I may, has been really helpful as a pharmacist in seeing what patients require copay assistance in order to cross that hump in January to access their treatment. If they can't access that out-of-pocket cost to get their treatment in January, they're not going to be able to fill their prescription in subsequent months, right? So the effort in Tennessee specifically has a little bit of history. A bill had been introduced to make equitable the out-of-pocket costs for patients on commercial insurance plans for cancer treatment a couple of years back. The bill didn't make it to committee, if I remember correctly, and it was not voted on to move forward in the legislative process. A couple of years went by, and the same House co-sponsor, Glenn Cassida from Franklin, Tennessee, outside Nashville, and Representative William Lambert, not Matthew, agreed to co-sponsor this bill in the House, and likewise Senator Bill Ketron from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, agreed to sponsor this bill in the Senate. And this bill was first introduced in the Senate. Interestingly, Senator Ketron asked about policy change that would impact blood cancer patients before knowing about this trend in the United States for states passing policy change to address this issue. Senator Ketron is a 2-year non-Hodgkin lymphoma survivor, and about a year ago, last month, had just completed a transplant. And so he was particularly invested in this issue about access, regardless of whether he had been treated with an oral oncolytic. He attested a number of times in front of his colleagues that the burden that comes with cancer diagnosis alone, travel from the community where he lives to his treatment center, and adding the cost burden that prevents you from being able to access the treatment that you know will save your life was a completely unnecessary burden, and he was a great champion. This issue needs shepherds to move it forward, as well as a loud, powerful, collective voice. And so we were grateful to have those leaders unique in Tennessee. You don't always see a bill sponsor willing to move this through the sausage making of making policy change. So that was really important for Tennessee. Those bill sponsors have committed to reintroducing this bill. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened with the life cycle of this bill. The Tennessee legislature, which we'll hear about in a little bit from Mr. Beatty, is less than 4 months, starts in January, ends in April or so. and thousands of bills are introduced to potentially be passed into law. Interestingly, as all state legislatures are, as unique as the states that they serve, a bill's got to pass the same content in both chambers. So it's a long life cycle in an incredibly short amount of time. That's a challenge inherently. The bill was introduced in late January after the start of the session, and we were quickly able to get some news coverage about the issue, putting it out in front. Quickly, cancer treatment fairness and oral parity interchangeably became a spotlight issue in Tennessee. Senator Ketron authored an op-ed that was published in Middle Tennessee News Journal, The Tennessean, and gave great perspective on why this issue is important from the patient's perspective, of course, urging his colleagues to support this bill. The first hurdle was getting this bill referred to a committee where it could begin the legislative process of going through a committee to the floor of the chamber, to another committee, to the floor, and then to the governor's desk. And so it accomplished that first hurdle by getting referred to the Senate Commerce and Labor Committee. The same day that the bill was scheduled to be on the agenda and heard before this 9-member Senate committee, a terrific article was published by the Jackson Sun in Jackson, Tennessee, about Laurie, who actually works in the radiation center in Jackson. Is there someone here from Jackson? I thought I saw on the list from the cancer center there. She was also a CML survivor and spoke about the difference her experience has been in having adequate coverage and coverage that required her to pay a significant dollar amount out of pocket to access her CML treatment. We prepared for this bill to be presented to this 9-member committee in the Senate. We anticipated this is the D-Day. This is when this bill will be ready to move forward. And so we brought together an expert panel, including Dr. Jeff Patton, CEO of Tennessee Oncology. This is Kelly Owens, who's an oncology social worker at Vanderbilt, also shared that she's a 3-time cancer survivor herself, and at one point was on an orally administered treatment. And then a patient caregiver couple named Angelo and Teresa Leonardi, who we showed their story earlier on the screen. And they were able to testify to the importance from the provider standpoint, from a multidisciplinary team approach standpoint in serving patients, and from a direct patient's need in saying, I need to be able to go to work, I need to be able to keep my health, and my husband needs to go to work and participate in this economy, but we are challenged to be able to take care of this disease with these kinds of unnecessary burdens. Unfortunately, the Senate committee chairman determined that the panel had not presented a real need for passage of this kind of legislation in Tennessee. And so the agreement was made to roll the bill, delay the vote, because members weren't prepared to vote on it. We got some more great news coverage. The local TV station went into Teresa and Angelo's house, their apartment, and interviewed them about the kind of treatment regimen she's on and what that entails day to day. She had a basket, this big of all of her ancillary medication, and was able to share that. So that was really important for bringing the spotlight here. The bill was referred again since it hadn't been voted on to the same committee, and they had to hear it again. So we met the chairman's need and said, if you think that we haven't presented you with an example of a patient who needs this policy change, here is one. A man named Dan, who was referred by a combination of his pharmacist, his clinic pharmacist, and the nurse practitioner. They identified that he had been paying, he had a responsibility of $500 out of pocket per month based on his insurance plan, and had been relying on foundation support in order to make that payment and access his drug and remain on regimen. And so we called Dan, and Dan said, I'd be happy to speak. And so Dan was able to come and address the questions of that committee chairman. That committee meeting was contentious, at least. It was a pretty intense hour-long discussion about this issue between the opposition, which is primarily insurers, and the coalition of cancer groups that were led by Senator Ketron, and in this case by patient Dan. And so At that point, the bill had a co-sponsor that was really important. An ER physician, a veteran, a cancer survivor himself. His name's Senator Mark Green. He represents the Clarksville, Tennessee area. As I mentioned, he had signed on as a co-sponsor, and he began asking questions during this second bill hearing about equivalence. If patients can't access their oral oncolytic because of cost, aren't there IV equivalents that they can take instead? He said, I'd like to see a list of all of the approved oral oncolytics and review this because I'm a medical doctor. And so within 24 hours, we provided that to him. In 24 hours, we provided the list to him, and it's 2 columns. And we consulted. My colleagues and I are not medical doctors. We're certainly not oncologists. So we consulted to ensure that this list was as comprehensive as possible, but it's very difficult to go and find a list for every indication and just pop it out and send it over. So it took a lot of effort. We provided that to him. One column was an equivalent that's administered by IV, and the other column were all the baseline oral oncolytics for their drug indication. And so what he saw was one drug on that list that really had a true clinical equivalent, real apples to apples. During that contentious conversation, Dr. Green, feeling uncertain about the need for this policy because of his inquiry into equivalence, alternatives for patients, asked, please roll the bill one more week. And so Senator Ketron obliged. He's a better man than me. And the bill was pushed to the next week. It was heard again. We brought forward Dr. Shepard as an expert who made time, not to mention made time in his clinical schedule to drive in, park, go into the Capitol building for this bill hearing and be present to answer questions and speak to oral oncolytics prescribing. And when does a clinician do so? And is this a choice? Do patients have a choice? When can you prescribe an IV administered treatment if the patient can't access the oral? And Dr. Shepard, in short, said, if we're prescribing another, if not for this one drug on the list that you have, what we're prescribing is not a preferred method of treatment. And Dr. Green pushed you and said, but would there be other treatments that a patient could be treated with instead of not being treated at all? And he dug into that word I said earlier, alternatives. And he made this issue in its last leg about the clinical treatment of disease, regardless of how it's administered. And that really steered this bill away from what it's about, because it is about access for patients to innovative therapies that are available for you to successfully treat them, but remain out of reach. So inevitably, we held a press conference. We spoke what this bill is really about in our own terms. And inevitably, after the bill's vote, there was some more press coverage saying that this bill had stopped in the Senate committee. The final vote that killed the bill was 3 yay votes, 6 nay votes. Do you mind raising your hand if you practice in Tennessee, if you're a Tennessee resident? They're not raising their hands willingly, but I think they know what's coming next. So the strategy that the Cancer Treatment Fairness Coalition in Tennessee is focused on now until the Tennessee legislature reconvenes in January is to educate one-on-one members of the legislature who are going to vote on this bill again. It's likely going to be the same committee. We have great support in the House, but taking that for granted is not recommended. Our pointed priorities now through the early fall are to get in front of these 6 members who voted against the bill, because educating on how this bill works and also the purpose of the bill, focusing on that, its out-of-pocket cost, the cost burden to the patient, is critical. It easily gets lost. The bill is a page and a half. So for a bill, that's incredibly brief and simple. But the issue, especially because 41 states working it gives your opposition a lot of time to work it, as well as us to be prepared for what to expect, focusing on that conversation directly with these members is critical. The districts are listed here: Somerville, Clarksville, Franklin outside of Nashville, down south of Nashville and Shelbyville, and over in Chattanooga are critical districts where we need providers who are willing to go on a one-to-one meeting with us. The coalition is here to guide and plan out these advocacy efforts. We also need providers to identify patients that you're treating who would be impacted by this policy change. Patients on commercial plans who are experiencing out-of-pocket costs that's more than $100 to access their oral oncolytics. And we need to mobilize. The basis for this campaign became very grassroots, and phone calls and emails were going into these members' offices from patients and their family and friends who watched them go through treatment or are watching them go through treatment and get it and know about their challenges and are invested. And so they're able to do those things that are challenging when you're in clinic and you're treating patients. I cannot emphasize enough the power of the provider advocate in Tennessee, but this bill has also been introduced in Congress, and Congress will end, the two-year Congress that we're in right now will end in December. We'll have a new U.S. president elected, a lot of new congressmen, and next January we'll begin a new U.S. Congress where we'll be able to reintroduce the companion of this Tennessee oral parity bill. 70,000 emails went to members of Congress about this issue from advocates, patients, caregivers, providers. In Tennessee, the patients that you identified, who I said spoke up and said yes, Dan had never been to the state capitol. He had never spoken in front of a crowd, certainly not in front of cameras. And he willingly said yes. That second hearing that we had, the room was filled with advocates from American Cancer Society. Their annual lobby day was scheduled that same day, which was terrific. When it got rolled unexpectedly again, and we went for lucky number 3, the bill hearing on the third time around happened to be the same day as the Tennessee Medical Association's lobby day. And those physicians rallied around this issue, stood behind advocates at the press conference, spoke out to media, family practitioners who had read about the bill and understood the impact this would have on patients. Quality of life, being able to treat, adherence, all of those things. And they were incredible partners. This is Dr. Shepard talking to Senator Ketron about what was a really surprising, crazy, unexpected ride of this bill in its short 1-month timeline. This committee hearing and all of the legislative process can also be viewed online. And so my boss in Washington, D.C. was watching this unfold and took a snapshot. So that photo I shared of Dr. Patman Kelly speaking there is from her computer screen. They were critical in being able to provide that expert opinion. And then being in person and coming to the legislature wasn't the only way that people advocated. Patients and caregivers were able to provide their comments to the media in quotes, written down in story form, like Dan's here. We're able to do one-pagers. We would email all of these documents out to those members before the hearing was scheduled when we were on the agenda. We sent them pages of data that show the fiscal impact both in the state and to ensure if this change were to take place in other states that have implemented this change. We were able to send them personal stories of their own constituents. They need to hear more. Constituents vote them, and constituents are also patients and caregivers and providers. We're in the middle of a movement, not unlike seatbelt laws, not unlike changes in child maternal health, not unlike, for the patients I've worked with, down in South Louisiana, exposure to chemicals like benzene And finally, occupational safety changes that have protected patients and people the way they need to be protected. We're in the middle of a policy change that's going to impact cancer patients' lives. And the innovation of new therapies are faltered when patients can't access them. When a solution exists to change an outdated insurance plan design that has been proven to be affordable to insured, insurance companies are still in the business to provide insurance, and patients can still get treatment from you without unnecessary barriers in between. We're in the middle of a movement of making that change, but it's not going to happen quickly, and it's not going to happen with just one party. The voice needs to be loud, and we need your help. I would love to take questions, if that's useful.
We did have, thank you, Mary Catherine, by the way.
Sure, of course.
We did have an interesting comment from one of our webinar viewers. If Tennessee passes this oral state parity bill, or the other states that have passed it, do those laws apply to the federally funded plans?
They do not. The reason that the bill is introduced right now in Congress is because that policy change will only impact the insurance plans that Congress regulates. ORISA, self-insured plans have to follow a set of guidelines. And so you see that in large companies where they self-insure their employees. They have to follow these regulations. And to make a change in access and out-of-pocket has to be passed at the congressional level. But you still have patients who are covered by state-regulated insurance plans, individual plans since ACA, family plans, small group plans like through small business owners. Those are plans that are state-regulated. And the importance of passing this bill in all 50 states is to cover those patients who are in state-regulated commercial plans. You know, I'll add that Medicare patients are a significant population that you're treating, and that donut hole in the out-of-pocket cost for specialty tiers is a tremendous challenge. None of this even addresses that issue, and a separate policy change in Congress has to happen to address the Medicare issue. I said it wouldn't happen fast.
Question, what is up with Tennessee? I mean, how'd you get it through Louisiana? Are we more embedded with insurance lobbyists? Is that what? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the states that you see left are where you've got power in the insurance lobby that's pushing it back. The landscape right now, actually, this map doesn't show that Alaska passed this. Blue Cross Blue Shield specifically went neutral in Alaska, and that bill is on the governor's desk. Michigan and Pennsylvania have been working this issue for 6 years. And at one point, we're waiting for a committee chairman specifically to just, like, take a hike. And things are happening right now as we speak in those two states that could potentially change the landscape when introducing this bill in Tennessee. LOS is engaged in North Carolina and Alabama right now, which are going to be similarly challenging.
Ben Wheeler from Memphis. Yeah, this is a real issue. You know, I have a patient who has myeloma, and she's taking an IMID, and it costs them about $1,000 a month, which they've barely been able to afford. But now her husband has come down with melanoma, and he wants me to give him IV medicine instead of something oral because they can't afford $1,000 for both of them. So she has stopped taking her IMID in order to do this. So, you know, and it's not just, by the way, you know, leukemia, lymphoma. Right. You know, even in lung cancer where you have Tarceva and Xalkori, you know, it's a big issue.
Absolutely.
I'll just say this. The fatal flaw in your approach is that you've failed to understand that the Tennessee legislature is unconcerned with fairness, they're unconcerned with human issues, and they're unconcerned with data or what's right or wrong. What they're concerned about is the insurance lobby is huge. We're really worried about where transgender people use the bathroom, and we want to make sure you can have a gun and ammunition anywhere in the state on Sunday. So
gun safe and God.
And God forbid talk about refugee resettlement. I mean, it's absolutely, our state legislature is abysmal.
Yeah, Steve Grubbs. I was actually the physician that took it through Delaware's legislature to get it approved, and we didn't have near as bad a time as you've had. But I was curious, and I forget the date there. It seems like it was 6 years ago. What are the arguments of what are the main arguments of the insurance industry now in your state on this? I'm just curious.
It's a mandate.
Yeah.
Don't tell us what to do. Don't put government in between business and the service we provide as a business. We already provide parity. We already have parity in copays from the drug formulary to the medical benefit. That does not include coinsurance. What else? All the red herring arguments?
Yeah, okay. So, yeah.
There are a number of them.
Add an additional answer, which is that, of course, in a lot of cases, insurance plans use third-party pharmacy benefit managers to control cost of oral pharmacy prescribed medications. So they've got that in one bucket, and then they've got payment for Part B drugs and IV administered in another bucket, and they don't want to have to rock that boat. They want to allow the pharmacy benefit managers to continue to try to control cost on oral medications, and they don't want to have to rock that boat.
That actually was their main complaint, that this was going to be too hard to administer. And of course, I was able to turn that around by pointing out, I said, aren't you getting paid to do that? That's your job. My job is to get the right drug. Your job is to figure out how to get it covered by insurance. And the committee all looked at it and said, yeah, that is your job, isn't it? So shut up and let's get this thing passed.
Yeah, and to piggyback on your comment, what's often quickly skipped over into the weeds of the issue is the fact that health insurance is designed to spread risk across all policyholders. And so you've got a very small number of people who rely on orally administered specialty drugs for treatment, yet they are carrying the burden of the cost. That design has failed this population in spreading that cost around the risk pool. I mentioned that there were stacks of data provided to these legislators. You probably experienced this as well, that based on assessment of the states, an actuarial study of the states that implemented this policy, increase to premiums on the high end were about 50 cents per member per month in Texas to about 2 to 3 cents per member per month on the low end. And no one went belly up. Thank you, Dr. Shepard.
No, thank you. Use the restroom.